Hello, welcome to Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, California. I'm Eric Shafer, the senior pastor here at Mount Olive, and we're so pleased that you've joined us for this weekly discussion about hope, because we believe that hope matters. My guest today is a repeat guest, my dear friend, the Reverend Dr. Stephen Bouman. In his professional life previously, Dr. Bouman was the bishop of the Metropolitan New York Synod of our Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, recently retired as head of domestic mission in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. But of course, he's not really retired. He's working in a large congregation in Chicago, St. Luke's, right, Stephen?
St. Luke's, right near Wrigley Field, yeah.
Right near Wrigley Field. And since you hate baseball, that must be terrible. Anyway, we're glad you're with us. Well, we've interviewed Dr. Bouman before about hope and life and his career, but today I wanted to do a special interview that we're going to then broadcast on the week of the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks on New York City and Washington, D.C., because Bishop Bouman was the bishop of New York City at the time of the attacks. He and I have a special bond over that day because Bishop Anderson asked me to call him on the phone, and we were on the phone on and off for a number of hours that day as you watched the towers fall from your office window, as I remember. Is that correct, Stephen?
Yes, our offices were in the Interchurch Center on Riverside Drive. The backyard of my window was the Twin Towers a few miles downtown, and we saw smoke around it, and then the towers fall. And,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And as I remember, as you and I were talking, you weren't sure where your adult children were, and you were very concerned that they might be in that neighborhood. Do I remember that correctly?
My wife and my daughter both worked downtown, Lutheran Social Services. As it turned out, the engine from one of the planes went through the roof of that building, and they had to evacuate foster children and everyone to our church in Greenwich Village. I didn't know till later that night that my wife and daughter were okay.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I remember that well. And we talked that day. And then, then you kind of headed the efforts in recovery mode for the church and its institutions and even the city itself. And, it was, which went on for years after that, working for recovering from that. And
yeah. Yes. And it was terrible. The shock of it, the growing understanding of the tragedy, and looking for people became recovery of bodies and body parts. And right in that time, there were a couple of key things that happened. One of them was that I called my counterpart in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, David Benke, and I said, David, you and I have to figure this out. He said, where can I go? I'm in Brooklyn. And I said, go to Lutheran Medical Center. It's going to be a trauma site. And so he went to our hospital there and spent the day in the emergency room with the doctors and nurses. And then he and I started listening and meeting with leaders and putting together something that ended up being Lutheran Disaster Response New York. And we became at the heart of the recovery. Our congregations, our social ministry organizations, our networks, ecumenical, interfaith, and so on. We put $500,000 down for an unmet needs table that ended up leveraging over $20 million worth of help. As you might remember, people's businesses went away. The city was at a standstill, and the people really hurt were the most vulnerable. People that clean the hotels and the food truck down by Wall Street and those kinds of businesses. So it was, it was a terrible time, but we experienced the church at its best.
Yeah, I remember, and hats off to what's now Thrivent Financial for their help in matching contributions. I remember them turning over a check for millions of dollars that they helped match what Lutherans and others gave from all over the world for that.
Right. We had a traffic policeman from the Virgin Islands. Oldest Lutheran church in the world is in the Virgin Islands, and we have a congregation of Virgin Islanders in Harlem, Transfiguration. But anyway, this policeman came to my desk and put down a sack of money that he collected on the street corner from driving traffic. And he said, who should I give it to? He says, give it to the Bishop of New York. So we flew to New York, put that money on our table.
Hang on, I have to take a delivery here. Thank you. The office goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, I know you have story after story after story about this. So Stephen, the story that I remember the most that I've heard you tell and that I have told is the story of the firefighters as they were going up into the tower.
Yeah.
And if you might share that story.
Sure. Pastor William Reedy, who was a firefighter chaplain and also a pastor to the deaf, ran across the Brooklyn Bridge to the site of the attacks, asked what he could do, and they asked if he brought his oil, and he said yes. And so they invited him to anoint with oil the rescue workers and firefighters rushing in, and he did. And people later remembered coming down those steps and seeing these glistening foreheads, these brave people doing what they were born to do, but going, as we know, probably to their death. And Pastor Mandy Durr at St. Peter at the time mentioned that in a sermon. And we talked about Jacob's ladder with angels ascending and descending, and with God at each end of the ladder, either bearing with us on earth or bearing us home.
Yeah. And I know you had to work very hard to help people not to see this all as a and as an anti-Muslim thing in this country, and that was not easy at the beginning. It's not easy today.
Yeah, and we have an Arabic Lutheran congregation in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, the Salam. Pastor Hadar El Yatim, a Palestinian Lutheran from Bethlehem, and the president of his congregation, Adnan, is from Baghdad, from Iraq, and Arabs and Muslims in the neighborhood dropped their kids off to be safe in those first couple days at Salam. Salam became a place which became a heart of this. As we went around the synod listening to the lamentations of the people, again and again, we heard people who had gotten to know Arab people through Salam and say again and again and again, we can't get the wrong idea about this. And to their credit, at the time, Mayor Giuliani and President Bush on this issue were very, very good. They said this was not a religion that attacked us. These were some terrorists. And but yes, there were lots of incidents of people getting harassed, hassled, and that was on the streets of New York. But I'll tell you this: for every window that was broken in an establishment that people thought was Arab or foreign, there were 100 flowers. It really brought the best out in us. But I got to say this as well, Eric. It unleashed what we're still living with.
Yeah, no question.
Xenophobia, fear of the stranger. In some ways, I think we let our fear, our fear was maybe used against us, and we let our fear and our desire for security dim our hearts a little bit.
That belies the question then, to which there are answers, but no answers. What do we do about that, Stephen?
Yeah. I think compassion and justice is a long game. It is, Dr. King talked about that arc that bends. We do what we can with the strength that we have to welcome the stranger, to reach for and work for equity, to be hospitable in our own personal relationship, to get to know the other, to listen, and to find again our common humanity. For me, that's taken me, my congregations that I served were immigrant congregations. I saw them renovate neighborhoods I lived in. So this isn't, a nice white guy liberal on attitudes. This is lived experience of people who've enriched my life. And so it's taken me to, the border in Texas, and it's taken me to Central America to listen to people and why they keep coming and so on. So, but yeah, all I can say is we do what we can do, what's in our control. I think that's the only answer, is to live a life worthy of the gospel.
Very good. Well, you know that the theme of these programs is hope. And as you sort out the events of 20 years ago, where do you find hope in all of that and all of the response?
I've been doing some thinking about, it's 20 years later. What's different? What's the same? What have we learned? One of the things that happened on September 11th was we became like every other country. We experienced in our own land violence and hatred against us. And we've been living in this pandemic with death staring us in the face. One of the things that is different 20 years later is that in 2001, we could still be thrilled, all of us, that we're Americans, that it didn't sound jingoistic to hear the Star Spangled Banner, but now we're so divided. What gives me hope is that we have the same needs we've always had. People are still lamenting. The hope is that church is space where people can lament, where people can share their pain, where it can be lifted up and sanctuary can be created in the midst of it again and again and again. And my hope is that every community of Jesus in the world points to resurrection, not death as the final word. So that what gives me hope is the presence of the risen Christ.
It is. Yeah. In the end, that is where our hope must be.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for coming back and sharing a few words about this anniversary and, and for being my dear friend for all these years. We've lived through some interesting times, as they say.
Yes, we have.
All right.
That'll be worth finding you on the beach for a tall, cold one.
That's right. Okay.
God
All right. Good.
Bye-bye.
This has been Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica, California. Our guest today has been the Reverend Dr. Stephen Bouman, who was the Bishop of the New York City Lutheran Synod at the time of 9/11. And we've had a few minutes to reflect on the 20th anniversary and what it all means today and how we find hope in it. Hope you'll join us again next week when we talk again about Hope Matters, because we believe in a God of hope.